There's a moment in every life when silence becomes unbearable. Not the silence around you, but the silence inside you. The voice that used to scream for change has gone quiet. Not because you healed, but because you've adapted to a version of yourself you were never meant to become. And now, you're functioning. You're surviving. Maybe even succeeding. But something in you knows, this isn't it. This isn't me. And the longer you wear that mask, the heavier it becomes. That weight? It's not depression. It's not laziness. It's the spiritual fatigue of pretending to be someone you no longer believe in. But here's what no one tells you. The real transformation doesn't begin when you add more to yourself. It begins when you're finally ready to let something inside you die. Carl Jung understood this. He didn't speak of change as improvement. He spoke of individuation, a process of becoming whole, by confronting the illusions that have shaped your personality. He believed that the person you call I is often just a collection of compromises, wounds, and performances. And unless you face the truth of who you're not, you'll never have the energy to become who you are. So this is not a video about motivation, not about building habits, fixing routines, or hacking the brain. This is about death. The death of the false self. The version of you that was molded to be accepted, tamed to be manageable, trained to be efficient, obedient, likable. And maybe you've outgrown that skin, but you're still wearing it because the world keeps applauding. But every time they clap, you feel emptier. Because they're not clapping for you. They're clapping for a performance you no longer wish to play. So I'm not here to inspire you. I'm here to dismantle the lie. Because as long as you keep refining a role that isn't yours, you'll never meet the part of you that was born to lead your life. Not just survive it. And if you're still watching, then somewhere inside you've already decided you're ready. Ready to become someone else. Not through escape, but through confrontation. Not by becoming something new, but by shedding what was never real. And if you stay with this, if you dare to stay until the final word, you won't leave with tips or tactics. You'll leave with something far more dangerous. A part of yourself that's been waiting patiently to return. Do you remember when they asked you what you wanted to be? You were young, naive, open. And maybe you answered with something bold, an artist, a scientist, an explorer, a rebel. You had no ceiling yet, no shame, no strategy, just desire. But then came the silence, the glance, the question behind the question. Will that make money? Will people respect you? Will you fit? And so slowly, you edited your answer. You made it smaller, more practical, more acceptable. And they smiled. And you smiled back, because survival often begins with agreement. But here's the cost. Each time you buried the real answer, you buried a piece of yourself. Until one day, you couldn't remember what the real answer even was. And now, you work. You function. You do what's asked. But late at night, when no one's watching, you feel it. That quiet ache. That sense that something essential went missing. It didn't disappear. It was exiled. And that exiled part of you has been trying to return. Not through dreams, not through fantasy, but through the breakdowns, the burnout, the sense of meaninglessness you can't seem to explain. That's not weakness. That's the soul calling itself back. But here's the paradox. You can't return to yourself until you're willing to abandon the self the world told you to become. And that's not a motivational line. It's a psychological requirement. Because as long as your energy is used to maintain a false version of who you are, there will never be enough left to create the version that's waiting. And if any part of this feels like truth, not just concept, but truth, then I invite you to stay. Not just watch, but stay. Stay with the discomfort. Stay with the unraveling. Stay with the pull toward something real. Because by the end of this, you won't have just learned something. You'll have remembered something your mind was trained to forget. And if that's a path you're finally ready to walk, then let this be your first step. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel. Not out of habit, but as a quiet agreement with yourself that the next version of you will no longer be denied. You've been taught to improve yourself, to optimize, to level up, to upgrade. But let's ask something deeper. Who is the self you're trying to improve? Where did it come from? Why do you protect it so fiercely? And what if the version of you that you're polishing every day is the very thing keeping you from being free? Carl Jung didn't see the ego as evil. He saw it as necessary, but incomplete. A shell, a structure, a survival tool. The ego is what allowed you to function in a world that demanded masks long before it ever asked for truth. But here's the trap. You began to believe that the mask was the face. And so now you're trying to change your life by dressing up the mask, making it more efficient, more attractive, more productive. But the real transformation, the kind that makes you feel alive, not just disciplined, requires something far more terrifying. The willingness to question the one who's been speaking inside your mind this entire time. The voice that says, I should be more successful. I need to prove myself. I can't show weakness. I have to stay in control. That voice was shaped by early praise, shaped by criticism, shaped by comparison, silence, reward, rejection. You became who you needed to be to earn love, to avoid punishment, to remain safe. And it worked. You're here. You survived. But survival has an expiration date. And the longer you cling to a personality built on what was once necessary, the longer you postpone what has now become possible. So ask yourself, what would happen if the person you think you are wasn't the person you were meant to be? Would you collapse? Or would you finally breathe? The old self will warn you. If you let go of me, you'll lose everything. But that's not the truth. That's the voice of structure, fearing its own irrelevance. Because on the other side of this identity, death is something the ego cannot comprehend. A self that doesn't need defense. A mind that doesn't need to prove. A presence that doesn't ask permission to be real. And if you feel even the faintest spark of what that could mean, then something ancient has already started to move. This is not improvement. It's erosion of lies, of masks, of scaffolds. And when that erosion is complete, when the structure collapses inward, what remains is not emptiness. It's truth. And truth doesn't need reinforcement. It moves on its own. Carl Jung did not believe that transformation came through striving. He believed it came through surrender, not to the world, but to the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime rejecting. He said, "You do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that darkness? It's not evil. It's not broken. It's you. It's the anger you suppress to be liked, the need you hide to seem strong, the desire you shame to look pure, the sadness you smile over so you won't be asked questions. Jung called it the shadow, the collection of all the traits you've disowned, because somewhere along the way, you were taught they made you unworthy. And here's what's devastatingly true. The more light you chase without confronting your shadow, the more fragile you become. You build a self so clean, so righteous, so high-functioning, that it shatters under pressure. Because it's built on fear. Fear of being exposed. Fear of being real. But Jung's path wasn't about fear. It was about wholeness. And wholeness demands contradiction. It demands that you make peace with the part of you that doesn't care about rules. The part of you that's still angry at your parents. The part of you that wants to quit, scream, destroy, sleep, vanish. Not to act on it, but to see it. To own it. To say, yes, that's me too. Because until you do, you'll keep building castles of identity on a foundation of denial. And no matter how beautiful they look, they will collapse. Jung knew that the false self must dissolve for the real self to emerge. Not the self that was taught, not the self that was rewarded, but the self that was buried. The self that can say, I am not just the good, I am not just the strong, I am everything, and I choose what to become. That's power. Not because it makes you unstoppable, but because it makes you real. And when you become real, the world's control over you weakens. The approval you chased begins to lose its grip. The fear that dictated your choices becomes transparent. And for the first time, you don't just change your behavior. You dissolve the one who needed to behave in the first place. That is the beginning of becoming someone else. Not a better version, a truer one. Let me ask you something you've probably never been asked directly. What part of you has survived? Only because you've kept it hidden? The voice that used to scream in childhood, but now whispers during meetings? The impulse that once ran wild but now waits behind a polite smile? The hunger that couldn't be explained, so you called it laziness, selfishness, shame. You've walked through life wearing masks so perfectly fitted, you forgot what your own face looks like. But here's what you've likely sensed and avoided. Your suffering doesn't come from who you are. It comes from who you pretend to be. And every time you play that role, the responsible one, the nice one, the tough one, the strong one, you gain control, but you lose vitality. It's a fair trade, isn't it? Stability for silence, acceptance for numbness, safety for soul. But it's not sustainable, because something deep inside you remembers what it felt like before the compromises, before the expectations, before your aliveness was managed into a predictable personality. And if you've been feeling lost, disconnected, apathetic, it's not because you're broken. It's because your old self is rotting around you, and you're still trying to keep it alive. You feel empty, not because life is meaningless, but because you're not in your life anymore. You're just maintaining it. And here's where the real fear begins to surface. If I let go of who I've been, who will I be? And the answer is terrifying, because it cannot be answered with words, only with becoming. But know this, the real shift, the irreversible change, doesn't come from doing more, or working harder, or fixing flaws. It comes from doing something you've never truly tried before, something radical, something ancient, something forgotten. And when you finally do it, you won't have to fight to become someone else. The old self will simply fall away. But we're not there yet, because before that can happen, you have to be willing to feel what you've been running from your entire life. And that is where the transformation begins. Do you remember the moment we spoke of, when you were asked what you wanted to be? When your answer was wild and honest and untouched by strategy? Now imagine this. You wake up tomorrow, and you no longer need to explain yourself. You no longer seek applause. You no longer apologize for your depth, your stillness, your desire. You no longer shrink to fit into their expectations because you've outgrown the prison of needing to be understood. That's what it feels like when the old self dies. There's no explosion, no grand announcement, just quiet, clean, unfamiliar quiet. Because the noise that used to fill your head, the fear of judgment, the self-doubt, the unrelenting need to prove, has lost its source of power. You begin to act from presence, not performance, from clarity, not calculation, and everything changes. You stop chasing purpose and start living with intention. You stop rehearsing who to be and begin responding as who you are. You no longer fear failure because failure doesn't threaten your identity anymore. And here's the most paradoxical part. You become magnetic, not because you're louder, not because you're more impressive, but because you've stopped being artificial. And people can feel that. People can feel when someone is no longer trying to be anything. And ironically, that's when you start becoming everything you were meant to be. You start creating not to get noticed, but because you have something real to express. You start saying no, not to control others, but to remain true to yourself. You start connecting not through performance, but through presence. And that presence, it's not something you practice. It's what rises when the divided self disappears. That's why you've struggled for so long. Because every attempt at change was still rooted in the belief that you needed to be someone else to be enough. But the truth, the old you was the distortion. Not because it was bad, but because it was borrowed. And when you let it fall, not forcefully, but consciously, you don't just feel free. You feel real, not enlightened, not superior, not perfect, just real. And in that realness, discipline becomes effortless. Relationships become honest. Direction becomes clear. Because nothing is leaking energy anymore to uphold the lie. You are whole. And wholeness doesn't try to become. It just is. So now, we reach it. The one thing that changes everything. The one thing that makes the old self disappear and allows the new self to arise without force. It's not affirmation. It's not discipline. It's not control. It's mourning. Yes, the only way to become someone else is to grieve the one you've been. And no one talks about that. Everyone wants transformation to feel like triumph, like light, like clarity. But real transformation begins with a funeral, a quiet one, with no audience, no closure, just you, sitting in the stillness of everything you no longer wish to be, and feeling it, feeling the fear of letting go, the guilt of disappointing others, the ache of unlived years, the sorrow of realizing how long you've betrayed yourself just to be accepted. Jung knew this well. He said the journey of individuation demands the confrontation with death, not literal death, but the death of everything false within. And until you allow yourself to fully feel the cost of who you've pretended to be, you will keep slipping back into that role. Because we don't abandon what we haven't mourned. We repeat it. We reinforce it. We recreate it in different forms, hoping maybe this time we can keep the illusion without the pain. But we can't. So if you truly want to become someone else, you must first bow to the life you no longer wish to carry forward. Not reject it, not hate it. Bow to it. Because that version of you, the one you're ready to leave behind, was trying to survive. It played its role. It got you here, but it can't take you further. So you thank it. You grieve it. You release it. And in that release, something strange happens. You begin to feel power where there used to be performance. You begin to feel presence where there used to be protection. You begin to feel clarity where there used to be confusion. Because now, you're no longer holding up an identity. You're moving from reality. And that shift from self-maintenance to self-truth is what makes you unstoppable. Not louder, not harder, not more impressive, just unmovable. Because nothing outside of you can threaten what no longer depends on being seen. This is what it means to become someone else. Not someone better. Someone undeniably true. And once that happens, you don't need to change anymore. You just need to be. Now, breathe. Not because it's over, but because something inside you has finally been given space to begin. You don't need to declare anything. You don't need to announce a new version of yourself to the world. You don't need to prove that you're finally changing. That's what the old self would do. The new self? It doesn't perform change. It embodies it. Quietly, steadily, relentlessly. And from this moment on, you will notice things shift. Not because the world has changed, but because the lens through which you perceive it has dissolved. That lens was made of expectations, roles, fears, rewards. And now, there's just presence. And in presence, you don't need to become someone. You simply remember who you were before you were told who to be. Carl Jung knew this wasn't a destination. It's a cycle. Over and over, we meet the self we've become, grieve what must go, and return to what's always been true. And if you're here, not just watching, but here, then the old self didn't survive this video. It cracked, even if just a little. And that crack is the opening where your real life begins. So don't rush to fill it. Don't panic to rebuild. Just stand in the open space between what was and what wants to emerge. Because that space is sacred, and what comes from it will not be forced. It will be free. Now, two paths appear before your eyes. Choose that path. The mind is a labyrinth, but if you learn to walk it with consciousness, you don't escape it. You master it. Don't choose with impulse. Choose with intention. I'll meet you there.